It's the mock draft that nobody wants to do. The post-Marshon Lattimore trade mock draft lands the Saints not only their next top corner, but an additional first-round pick in this year's draft. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode, it's the mock draft Monday that nobody wants to talk about. What happens if the New Orleans Saints trade away Marshon Lattimore? And what would that mock draft look like, including the potential to land their next top corner, and of course, an additional first-round pick? How do we spend it? We're answering all those questions and taking a look at how the Saints can build versatility and change their prototypes in this year's draft as well on today's episode. Appreciate you very much, as always, for being an everydayer here on the Locked On Saints podcast and for making us your first listen of the day every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Make every moment more, because right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning any $5 bet. Get started today at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. So yes, it's the mock draft that no one wants to do, but it was a great question coming from Cam over from our Insiders program, taking a look at the idea of what would happen if the New Orleans Saints did indeed make that move. What if they traded Marshon Lattimore before the draft, got an additional first-round draft pick? We'll go over what that compensation could look like and how the New Orleans Saints can spin those two first-round picks. Now, one of the things we're also going to be taking a look at here is, again, breaking down a scenario. This isn't advocating for trading Marshon Lattimore. I have been vehemently against trading Marshon Lattimore, at least before this season. And there's also a timeline conversation. Do they need to trade him before the draft? No, they could wait until before the season to trade him if they wanted to, because that roster bonus doesn't kick in until a week before the season begins, all this other stuff. There's a lot of different factors to all this, but we're just exploring the one scenario. What if the Saints traded Marshon Lattimore before the draft? So the first thing we have to take a look at here is, what's the compensation that you get? So I did a pretty chalky trade here for the sake of this scenario. And I worked with the Detroit Lions, traded Marshon Lattimore to Detroit. They're in need of cornerback help. You probably would try to trade him to the AFC, send him to Denver, send him to Pittsburgh or something like that in a realistic situation. But I wanted to work with an end of the first round pick, but I didn't want to trade him to, Kansas City or something like that, because no. And so I just worked with the Detroit Lions here, but insert whatever team, it doesn't matter to me. So I made that trade, got the 29th overall selection in the back end of the first round. That's what I was looking for. And then some future draft picks as well. I wasn't worried about getting multiple picks in this year's draft. I wanted the one first round pick and then some future picks and then move on from there. So that's the way that I worked out this trade with Marshon. Then the next thing was answering the question, does trading Marshon Lattimore away mean that the cornerback spot now becomes a big need? Do you need to address that cornerback spot? You've got Paulson Adebo, who had a fantastic 2023. Alontae Taylor, who impresses a ton on the outside, has been kind of cross-training in the slot, but was benched a couple of times during the season playing in the slot, but then made his plays on the outside, 2 interceptions from playing on the outside and all that sort of in happenstance or even injury-related things like that. So there's like a lot of good things to make you feel really good about those two guys on the outside. And then the Isaac Yiadom conversation, do you re-sign him and bring him back? I think that the Saints should. So there's a chance that with those three corners, the Saints go, no, we're good. We don't need to draft somebody in the first round. Go and get a vet in free agency, draft somebody later on in the draft and all that. But I wanted to explore the idea of replacing Marshon Lattimore. Like if you did that, kind of like what the Titans did, they traded away A.J. Brown and then immediately drafted Treylon Burks in that same draft. You created a need, but then you filled that need immediately in the draft. So if the Saints went that route, what would that look like for them? So let's start off here with what the first round selection would look like, which gives us Quinyon Mitchell, the outstanding cornerback out of Toledo, 6 foot, 196 pounds. really good plays on the ball, 6 career interceptions, 44.7% career completion percentage allowed. He also had 32 career pass breakups, outstanding forced incompletion percentage as well. It's the ball skills, it's the physicality, it's the fact that he could fit in a man system, it's the size, it's the strength, all of that other stuff. There is just a ton of really, really good stuff about Quinyon Mitchell. I think the next thing that you're looking at with him is how does he translate to your system in particular? And can he effectively, right, maintain and live up to the lofty expectations of one-to-one replacing Marshon Lattimore in a way, right? Like that's immediately what he would be compared to for the rest of his career, because the Saints trade, it's kind of like the Treylon Burks conversation. The Saints trade away Marshon Lattimore and then draft a cornerback in the top 15. That cornerback is expected to become the Saints' number one guy. Can he do that? I think he's got the talent to do it. He's the type of corner that you never want to throw an out route in his direction because he will pick it off and he will take it home. He had one game where he picked off, I think it was 3 total interceptions in that same game, but 2 of them were pick sixes on out routes to the boundary where he picked them off in stride and then brought them back to the house. I mean, just outstanding player when it comes to the ball skills. Really, really good technique as well, sticking to the hips of wide receivers, not letting them create any separation, all that. He is a very, very good cover corner, and he's exactly what you would want for this system, is what it feels like. So he's got the size, he's got the relentless, tenacious, or let me say the relentless nature and the tenacity that you want from a top cornerback, supreme confidence, all that. Doesn't matter that he's coming from Toledo. If you're a corner who can cover, you're a corner who can cover. I mean, it does not matter. And so he's a guy that feels like a really, really good fit in a way that the Saints could go if they decided to do that. Now, here's the tricky part, right? What if the Saints feel like they're very much set at the cornerback spot and they move on from Marshon Lattimore for whatever reasons and then decide, okay, just going to grab a vet, maybe draft a corner late, but don't need to jump up and spin that 14th overall selection at that position. I kind of did that knowing that Quinyon Mitchell was the best player on the board in my draft simulation, right? In the simulation that I ran. But had, an Olu Fashanu, the offensive tackle out of Penn State, been there, had a Taliese Fuaga out of Oregon State, that offensive tackle been there, maybe I would have gone there. If Jared Verse was on the board, maybe I would have gone there for the edge rusher out of Florida State. So it could be very interesting to see if the Saints were to do that and then get a back of the first round pick for them to spend both of those picks on either side of the trenches, one on the offensive line, the other on the defensive line, whichever one you use. So for instance, would you rather have Quinyon Mitchell at 14 and then either a tackle or an edge rusher at 29, or would you rather have, let's say, Laiatu Latu at 14 and Tyler Guyton, the offensive tackle out of Oklahoma, at 29, or flip that position-wise and go Taliese Fuaga, that offensive tackle out of Oregon State, at 14, and then Chris Braswell, the edge rusher out of Alabama, at 29, right? So like there's 3 different scenarios there that, depending upon free agency, one would make more sense than the other. Like if they address the trenches on both sides in free agency well enough, then yeah, go and grab the best player available. And if that happens to be Quinyon Mitchell, then congratulations, you just hit the jackpot on another fantastic cornerback, which maybe even opens up the opportunity by the end of the round to then make this trade of Marshon Lattimore to get back on the board at 29 to grab an edge rusher or an offensive tackle. So lots of interesting things could come about depending upon the timeline of a Marshon Lattimore trade should one happen. And all of those scenarios, very, very interesting to explore. So now, what do we do with that next first round pick? We're going to use it to challenge the prototypes of the New Orleans Saints. And that's what we're going to be doing over the course of the next few selections, including day 2 and getting into day 3. So we're going to get to the next 4 or so picks here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now you can go and shoot your shot with Locked On's official sports betting partners over at FanDuel with the NBA season underway. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets by simply winning any $5 bet. Doesn't matter if the odds are overwhelmingly in your favor. If with your first bet you put $5 down and win, That's $150 your way just for winning that $5 bet. Yeah, it's like 30-1 odds. It's awesome. So you can put that in on a bunch of stuff with the NBA. You also check out NFL draft odds as well. Who's going to be the number 1 overall pick, the number 2 overall selection, all of that. You can check all that out. Plus quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and much more. So head over to fanduel.com/lockedon to get started today. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, family, with our additional first round pick after the Marshon Lattimore trade, we're looking to beef up the trenches, but also change the prototypes and challenge the status quo. Yeah, we got a lot going on in this mock draft. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day for your second listen. Make sure you go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 national sports stream, YouTube's first ever. You can subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube to check it out. Once again, national sports, first ever 24/7 stream on YouTube. Go and check it out. So now we're looking at what we're going to do with this additional first round selection that we got in the faux Marshon Lattimore trade. Again, this is not an episode to advocate for the trading of Marshon Lattimore. We're just doing the thing we do with all mock drafts, and we're exploring scenarios. So in this scenario, Marshon Lattimore traded to the Detroit Lions for the 29th overall selection and some future draft considerations as well. So what do we do with pick 29? With pick 14, we replaced one of those cornerback holes with Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. Now, let's take a look at beefing up the trenches quite a bit and maybe challenging the prototype just a touch by going after the speed rusher from Alabama. No, not Dallas Turner, but Chris Braswell. Now, Braswell is somebody that I really enjoyed watching in Mobile. I thought he had a lot going for him and made himself some money in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. The edge rusher out of Alabama had 8 sacks in 2023, including a lot of half sacks that were a part of that as well. 10.5 tackles for a loss last season, and then a 18.2% pass rush win rate, which is pretty solid. It's not as impressive as Laiatu Latu had something ridiculous like 40% pass rush win rate last year, but it's a really, really good standard number. Like Laiatu Latu was in another stratosphere, and then Chris Braswell was like good. You know what I mean? And so I think the thing that you're looking at with Braswell is how does he fit the prototype? So at 6'3", 255 pounds, honestly, a little bit undersized height-wise. Weight-wise, it all works, but you're probably not going to be able to put a lot of weight on his 6'3" frame. You're not going to show up and say, okay, well now you're gonna beef up to 270-pound playing weight at 6'3". You're probably not going to go that route, but it's not far off from where Cam Jordan was during the time that he was at the combine in terms of when he weighed in. And of course, the Saints ended up drafting him. Now, Cam has jokingly talked about how he ended up being one of the smaller defensive ends that the Saints have invested in here as of late. But he was at 6'4". The thing about it was that he was playing at 287 when he was in college. Are you going to be able to beef up Chris Braswell to the 280, 270 spot at 6'3"? Maybe not. But do you need to? Could you just enjoy having the 6'3", 255-pound speedster that can run the arc and bend and do all the things that the Saints maybe need added to their pass rush plan in terms of having that speedy, athletic edge rusher? He's the guy that could absolutely fit that mold. So that's a way that I wouldn't mind seeing the Saints go if they ended up netting an extra first-round pick or even an early second-round pick in a potential Marshon Lattimore trade. So one way to go. And again, you could swap all this around and draft an offensive lineman with 14 and then Chris Braswell with this 29 pick. You could go with an edge rusher earlier, and then Tyler Guyton, the offensive tackle out of Oklahoma, was also available on the board. So that could be a way to go. But I wanted to wait until the second round to address offensive tackle because you could still get some really, really good offensive tackles in this year's draft. And that's exactly what I was able to do by going with BYU offensive tackle Kingsley Suamataia in the second round. So that was at pick 45 there, allowed 2 career sacks only, played 63.6% of his career run blocking snaps in zone run, according to Pro Football Focus. So he's got a lot of experience in that zone run, over 1,300 career snaps as well. So this goes to breaking the prototypes, even though size-wise, Suamataia is pretty much in the Saints metric. He's effectively like in their mold. 6'6", 315 pounds nestles him perfectly in sort of the mold or tapestry of where the New Orleans Saints have gone before when it comes to offensive tackles. But the thing that kind of breaks the mold here is that you're not getting a guy that played at a lower level of college football. You're getting a guy instead that has played against elite pass rushing talent in his time at BYU, whether he was playing, against Big 12 teams, whether he was playing against other independent teams, whether he was playing Big 10 teams, like whatever it might be, even Pac-12 teams. He played good pass rushing talent throughout his career, drafted first-round pass rushing talent during his time. And so I think that that's a part of breaking the mold when it comes to what the New Orleans Saints have often invested in when it comes to offensive tackle. Sometimes it's the guys that, it's the opposite of the Trevor Penning situation, where you're not drafting the project guy that's coming in and that's coming from a lower level of competition that needs to learn how to, that needs development in the pass rush game or in the pass blocking game and things like that. This is a guy that knows how to pass block, and that's the thing that you want here. So if you somebody to come in and maybe give you some competition, he's got some versatility. He's a guy that could come in and maybe Trevor Penning wins that left tackle spot, which we're hoping that he's able to do this year for sure. Would love to see that for him. And then maybe, Suamataia ends up being the successor to Ryan Ramczyk over on the right side and everything. So there's a lot of different ways for this to go, but I do like being able to grab a really, really good tackle in the second round. Him, Patrick Paul out of Houston was around there at that area, and others. So not a bad situation. Let's keep challenging the prototype here. Let's go into our next selection. So this one is actually another trade up. I moved 2 of the 5th round compensatory selections to be able to move up into the 4th round at pick 121 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that was a trade that allowed me to be able to land a guy that we talked about last week. We were talking about challenging the wide receiver prototypes. We did it again here with Malik Washington out of Virginia. So at 5'8", 194 pounds, he would normally be a guy that we would immediately write off as not being a fit for the Saints because he was 5'8". But with 111 receptions, 1,384 receiving yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns last year. By the way, out of those 111 receptions, 93 of them came from the slot. Washington was the guy that I thought maybe we could invest in. Why? Because you have to look at who the Saints brought in as their new, not only wide receiver coach, but assistant wide receivers coach. Keith Williams, who was the assistant wide receivers coach in Baltimore and got a lot of success out of Zay Flowers in his first year, smaller wide receiver. And then you look at Denarius McGee, who's coming in from Houston, who got a lot of success out of Tank Dell over in Houston. So now Malik Washington kind of fits that mold as well as a guy that would usually be too undersized to make sense for the New Orleans Saints, but in this situation ends up making potential sense for them if they are challenging and changing that prototype over time. So he's a guy that I really like. And look, the Saints could potentially go after Hunter Renfrow once he inevitably hits the market, get a slot specialist that way, or you could draft one. Porque no los dos. You could do both as well, and then get yourself that young slot specialist that can come in and have some yards after catch threat, give you all of that from a speed perspective as well. Do a lot of the things that you saw the Ravens do with Zay Flowers. Do a lot of things that you saw the Houston Texans do with Tank Dell as well. And then to wrap it up, this one doesn't really change the prototype here, but before we get to versatility conversations, I wanted to end here with, of course, we had to go back to our guy in round 5, pick 149, Penn State tight end Theo Johnson. Look, I'm not going to give it up, okay? I'm not going to give it up. 77 career receptions, 938 career receiving yards, 12 receiving touchdowns over the course of his career as well. Doesn't have one of those big standout over hyper-productive seasons, but my goodness, is he a ridiculously good player. And I cannot wait to see him this week in Indianapolis at the Combine at 6'6", I think is where he's going to measure in at 6'6", 257-ish pounds. He's expected to run in the 4.5s, according to our guys over at Locked On NFL Draft. So I'm very, very excited to see Theo Johnson this week in Indianapolis and how he could potentially help himself and his stock. It's a little bit of a draft crush, all right? Give me, just let me have it. Just let me have it. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at how the Saints can continue to build some versatility on both sides of the football in day 3. That was the theme in day 3 last year. Let's replicate that sort of rhythm again here in 2024. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let me ask you a question. If you had 1 extra hour in your day, how would you spend it? A lot of us feel like we need that extra hour, wish that we had a little bit more time, but if time was unlimited, how would we choose to use it to best benefit ourselves? And so sometimes it's a good idea to help yourself prioritize and get an idea of what it is that's important to you so that when you do find that time, you invest that time in what is important to you. And therapy is a really, really good way to find out what matters to you so that you can find ways to do more of it. And that's one of the things that I love about BetterHelp, along with the fact that it's super, super easy to utilize. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, built for your schedule to do from home, video chat, phone call, whatever it might be, to be able to find those things that mean the most to you and be able to start to invest more time in it. So if you've been thinking about giving BetterHelp a try, BetterHelp is the way, or if you've been thinking about giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is the way to go. So learn what makes you happy today with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon for 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Let's get it. It's time to invest in some more versatility for this New Orleans Saints offense and defense. We know it's the calling card of the defense, and positionlessness is a really, really good thing in that Kubiak-Shanahan system as well. So let's build that as we wrap up our mock draft here on today's episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So coming up tomorrow, we're asking 3 of the biggest questions around the New Orleans Saints offseason. We'll discuss more Marshon Lattimore. We'll also discuss, of course, Michael Thomas, and we'll take a look at what the salary cap is setting up for in 2025 and why you shouldn't be concerned about it, despite some of the ongoing conversation that we always hear around the salary cap. So we'll get to all of that in tomorrow's episode. Make sure you come back through for that. So we're continuing on here with our last 4 selections. Remember, I traded 2 of our compensatory 5th round picks to be able to move up into the 4th round and get Malik Washington, the wide receiver out of Virginia. So we've got 4 selections left, including a couple of 5th round or 1 5th round pick, 2 6th round selections, and a 7th round selection. The Saints spent day 3 last year really going with versatility and production were kind of the 2 focuses. You think about A.T. Perry can play inside and out, had a lot of production. You think about Jordan Howden can play slot, free safety, down in the box, and also had a lot of production, so on and so forth. Nick Saldiveri, guy that played tackle, played some center at the Senior Bowl, has played some guard in his time, all of that. So I wanted to keep that sort of conversation going as we wrap up day 3 of this mock draft. So let's take a look at Purdue running back Tyrone Tracy. This is another repeat pick for me, but I wanted to get him in 2 straight mock drafts so that we could discuss him a little bit more. Before he was a running back with Purdue, he was a wide receiver over at Iowa. His career yards from scrimmage, 2,148, a total of 15 scrimmage touchdowns and 8.3 yards per touch, whether rush or receiving, during his times at Purdue and Iowa. One of the things that I really like about him is that he's a really good ball tracker when he has to, get up under a pass or, is tracking across the field, things like that. Really good with running those crossing routes, whether they be out of the backfield, out of the slot, or even out wide if you need him to. That's what he did at Iowa. He's also really good with his vision, good speed, good breakaway ability as well. Good decision maker, doesn't really hesitate a ton, although he does have those moments. Those are all the things that you like about it. Remember, scouting is all about finding what does a player do well, and does that work for your system? A lot of things that Tyrone Tracy does well fits sort of the Deebo Samuel kind of mold. He's got the receiver ability. You can operate with him out of the backfield as well. And he can be a legitimate runner for you as a change of pace guy for your future if you needed that as well. So I really like a guy like Tyrone Tracy who comes in at 6'1", 215 pounds is what he's listed at. 210 pounds is what he's currently listed at. So he's got good size, he's got good running back size, good NFL size as well. He's got NFL speed, quickness, all of that kind of stuff. So I really like a Tyrone Tracy. There's not a lot of running backs that really jump off for me early on in this draft, but man, there's some really, really good day 3 guys, and Tyrone Tracy's absolutely one of them. All right, let's go to our first 6th round selection here. This is the 6th round selection that already belongs to New Orleans. That is going to be Ladarius Henderson, the offensive lineman out of Michigan. But I'm not drafting him because of what he did at Michigan, because if we're being honest, he wasn't very good when he was at Michigan. So why am I drafting a guy who, allowed 11 career sacks, who only did, who spent less than 50% of his time in zone run, but has over 1,200 career snaps? What's the intrigue here? Well, the intrigue is that before he was with Michigan, he was at Arizona State, and he was a pretty solid guard during that time. That's really the thing that I like about him, is the versatility. So you think about Nick Saldiveri being a good pick for the Saints last year, although we didn't get to see it completely pan out in his rookie season. He's still somebody that I'm very interested to see him challenge for that starting left guard role with James Hurst I don't think Andres Pete's going to be back. And if he is, he's probably back at left tackle, not at left guard. Nick Saldiveri is the guy that should challenge to start at that spot going in. So I'll be very interested to see how all of that works out. But hey, bring in more competition and bring in the versatility. This is a guy that's played, both guard spots. He can play both tackle spots. The only place that he hasn't really played throughout his career is at center. And you're okay with that. Like, this is a good spot to grab a guy like this in the 6th round, who, even though he's allowed 11 career sacks, it's not 20, 25 career sacks like some of the guys that you'd be drafting at this point in the draft at that position. And he's got the versatility to maybe be a swing guy for you, to be a developmental swing guy that probably starts on the practice squad or something like that. So Ladarius Henderson, a really, really interesting one that has literally nothing to do with what he did. Oh, I don't want to say literally nothing, because he played tackle and you're accepting the swing capabilities and stuff like that. But at 6'4", 315 pounds, you're probably not starting it. You probably don't want to start him at tackle anyway. He's too short, right? He's too small. But he's got a 34-inch arm, so he's got good arm length, all that. So I think the thing you're really looking at here is the potential for versatility on the offensive line and how that could potentially benefit the Saints and benefit a guy like Ladarius Henderson. That's what gets you drafted at this point in the draft. Next up, another repeat pick here. I'm going back to this one. I haven't selected this one in a while, but I'm going to Washington State edge rusher Brennan Jackson. Fits a little bit more of the Saints mold in terms of size at 6'4", 265 pounds. He's a little bit closer to the Cam Jordan height weight situation there, and absolutely has the frame to add more weight and still be able to be productive. 20 and a half career sacks, 35 career tackles for a loss as well. 11.8% pass rush win rate is pretty much middle of the road, kind of average in terms of what you would see from this year's class of edge rushers, but really good culture guy. A lot of the stuff that the Saints really care about, he would check off the boxes from the intangible side of it all as well. I don't know that he really brings you a ton of versatility, but he's somebody that could potentially be a NASCAR package guy, all that. I think you still want to see what's going to happen with Isaiah Foskey. What does Peyton Turner turn into when he's able to stay on the field and all that? Like, the Saints have a lot of options, so I'm doubling up at edge rusher when I maybe don't need to in this mock, but hey, let me take a swing at a guy that I think would be a good fit here. Again, in the 6th round, it's going to be what it's going to be. And then finally, to wrap up the draft here, this is that pick, the 7th round pick that's coming over from Denver as a part of the Sean Payton trade. Mark Perry is who I'm going with, the safety out of TCU. So I have a habit of drafting safeties at this spot. Guys like Kenny Logan out of Kansas, Katan Oladapo out of Oregon State. Let's add Mark Perry to the list here. At 6 foot, 200 pounds, 3 career interceptions, 15 and a half tackles for a loss, 19% forced incompletion rate. That forced incompletion rate's really good. He doesn't have a lot to show in his career in terms of ball skills when it comes to interceptions, but he definitely has them when it comes to breaking up passes, and he's got the versatility. Last year, actually, let's go back to 2022. 328 snaps deep, so playing kind of that deep safety role. 444 in the box, 163 in the slot. So he moved around a ton. Last year in 2023, he only played 72 in the slot, but played over 300 in the box, over 250 or nearly 250 out deep. So the versatility is there for him to be able to kind of move around and everything, and kind of be one of those guys where, like, if you move on from Marcus May, let's say the Saints move on from Marcus May and they, bring back Jonathan Abram, and they have Jonathan Abram and Tyrann Mathieu as their starting safeties, and you want to have Jordan Howden be your backup as your post safety, your deep safety behind Tyrann Mathieu, but you want to draft somebody, maybe learn a little bit behind Jonathan Abram. And let's say the Saints also brought back Lonnie Johnson Jr., who can play a little bit of everything. Mark Perry's a good swing to take on the practice squad in the 7th round, and then see what you're able to develop him into. I think that that's a good spot. This is a good spot to take a swing at that safety position, should you choose. So that's it. That's our 7-round mock draft here. Oh, one other thing too, Justin Mello over at TDN, who does a great job keeping, doing interviews and keeping up with visits and all that stuff with draft prospects, noted that at the Shrine Bowl, the Saints met with Mark Perry twice, which is pretty rare. Now, they often also draft guys that they never talk to over the course of the offseason, but just something to keep an eye out on there. So just a quick recap, we went Toledo cornerback Quinyon Mitchell in the 1st round, followed up by Chris Braswell with our extra 1st round pick after trading away Marshon Lattimore to explore that scenario. We went with Kingsley Suamataia, the offensive tackle out of BYU in the 2nd round, traded up into the 4th round to grab Virginia wide receiver Malik Washington. Grab Theo Johnson, the Penn State tight end, followed by Tyrone Tracy, the versatile running back out of Purdue. Ladarius Henderson, the versatile offensive lineman out of Michigan, started off our 6th round, which we wrapped up with Brennan Jackson, the pass rusher out of Washington State. And we wrapped up the entire draft in the 7th round with TCU safety Mark Perry. So that's our mock draft for this week. We'll be back with more and another mock draft, our post-combine mock draft on Monday next week. Tomorrow, we take a look at some big questions for the Saints offseason as I travel over to Indianapolis, where we're bringing some combine updates. Appreciate you as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pelicans, Locked On LSU as well. But we appreciate you very much. Make it Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.